It is a great privilege in my role to speak to many governments, clients, financiers, customers, employees, and stakeholders in the world of sustainability. It's a great privilege, but it's also a great responsibility to share with you today what they're all saying. The world is very anxious at the moment. Geopolitics is playing out at a level of pace that you have never seen before. The need to move forward into action is unprecedented. When it comes to the world of sustainability, the low-hanging fruit has been well and truly picked. Businesses and governments have been setting targets over the last 5 to 7 years, setting commitments to reaching net zero. In some cases, they have been refreshing those commitments. In other cases, they haven't even shared their updated commitments through the NDC process. When it comes to action, businesses are looking for a new way of talking about sustainability. And that's why I'm here today, to represent the virtual group and frankly, to use the stage set up in a way that allows me to walk across the stakeholders, to share with you some of the insights that will give you the confidence to support your conversations and move to action. It might seem quite unusual for you, for someone who leads a sustainability business, to say the following. Sustainability needs to find new pools of value if we're going to move to action. Sustainability needs to learn and speak the language of business and the language of growth. Sustainability needs to hyper-collaborate and find some new friends to support the move to action. Today, I want to share with you some practical hints and tips and pathways and language that people on this stage, virtually here, would recognize to allow us to do one thing and one thing alone, to move to action, to support a thriving business planet where people can thrive, but remaining within our planetary boundaries. So I make no excuse at all for the language that I'm using today to be grounded in action and to be grounded in the language of business to allow us to move to the next stage. This slide I want to share with you, and I'm going to take a few minutes over this. Historically, as sustainability professionals, we have done a great job, an exceptional job of shining a light on the right-hand side of this chart. We've been talking so much about the risk of climate change. We know our planetary warming is likely to head to 2.5 to 2.9 by the end of the century. We know the last 10 years have been the warmest on history. We point that out very well. We also point out to our business leaders and to governments that actually regulation is rising. You need to act because regulation is rising. One of the things that I hear when I talk to stakeholders, and particularly those in the CSO function, they're a little bit nervous, they're a little bit anxious, and they're a little bit worried about the rolling back of regulation. Why is that? Because we've used that as a means to get action over the last 5 years. That's why. It's really uncomfortable when the normal way that we get action from business and the language we've used is about to be removed or rolled back or diluted. I'll come on to the reality of that in a second. But it's a really scary place because we no longer have that massive regulation, reporting, disclosure, data, transparency to be able to create action. That's been removed. We also talk a lot about economic instability. In 2022, 1.8% of GDP was lost because of climate-related incidents. What do you think it's likely to be this year? Give me a hand for higher than 1.8. Higher than 5. Higher than 10. It is likely to exceed 10% of GDP. Let me just say that one more time. It is likely and predicted to cost more than 10% of GDP as a result of loss and damage coming from climate-related events. It is vast. It is huge, and it's increasing. Let me change the language a little bit, and let me talk about a different way of engaging with the stakeholders. Talking the language of business means talking the language of growth. It means talking the language of keeping me out of trouble and making my business better. These two things need to coexist in a world where regulation is not going to drive action in the way we have been used to. So some examples that I'd like to bring to bear. A really good one, an open one, about how you can create a business case. And Mariangela, I really liked your stats around some of the numbers and the value you were showing about the 30%. These are the stories that we need to ground. And the question about show me the money, ultimately, how do we create a financial case is really important. UPS, we all know who they are. It's a very open case study. Have used AI and technology to optimize their delivery routes. What that's allowed them to do is to invest in technology that has reduced their carbon footprint by 100,000 tons per year. That's the equivalent of 20,000 vehicles removed off the roads, which is good for our planet. The financial return and the cost to serve, which is not so publicly known, is also very positive. When we talk about creating action, I have to encourage you, when we think about how do we get buy-in and support, perfection is getting a little bit in the way of progress. And we need to be a bit more pragmatic. A small step forward is still a step forward. Recognizing the politics that's out there at the moment, being pragmatic in small steps forward. I'll give you another example. In a sector that's not particularly popular with conferences like this, the hydrocarbon sector, there is a vast amount of methane, as you know, that's flared from operations and drilling operations around the world. CH4 is 10 plus times more impactful as a greenhouse gas than CO2. Small pragmatic thing. Let it burn into the atmosphere or try and capture it and reuse it for energy. Methane to energy creates a vast reduction in the energy usage of Scope 1 and Scope 2 in the hydrocarbon sector. It also stops CH4 going to the planet, and it allows an operational opportunity for those organizations to move to a transition pathway faster, but making money. It's a dirty example, but it's pragmatic. It's a step forward. It's taking CH4 away, it's reducing it to CH2, and it's creating an energy use, which means we don't have to create more energy. I put that up there to be a little bit controversial to talk about oil and gas at a sustainability conference, but it's pragmatism, it's small steps. As you look at this world, the final thing I would say on this slide, when you talk about sustainability as an organization, when these folks are listening to us, in general, there is a pessimism bias. The level of trust that anyone has in anything we say about what we're doing towards action is very low. Trust is low in our segment. We need to be predictable in what we're doing. We need to be confident in what we're saying, and we need to be very vocal about how this can move to the left-hand side of this chart. That's how we get these people in the game. That's how we get finance and resources for action. As sustainability leaders, I compel you, I ask you, I beg you to start thinking in the world of hyper-collaboration. Start removing our previously used mantra of regulation and the risks on the right-hand side of this, and start really thinking about business, thinking about short-term, thinking about pragmatism. That's the action zone. I've got some good news for you. There's a business case to this. Our research has shown a couple of things. The first part of research, which is not this slide here, is that 7% of organizations we surveyed in 2022 were motivated by regulation to drive action. 7%. To say the concept of regulation rolling back is amplified is quite something. It is not driving action. It's driving transparency, it's driving accountability, but it's not driving funded action. What this research shows is that on average, when we speak to our clients, we have pace setters around 26 characteristics of leading organizations, and we've got observers, the passive observers. And we characterize value across the 5 dimensions. And I'm just pulling out the financial one. What our research has shown is that the business case, the financial case for being a pace setter in the area of sustainability is compelling. It is 1.8 times more valuable as a pace setter than it is an observer. The case for change is really strong, but we need to roll our sleeves up. We can no longer rely on compliance and regulation. We need to get into this zone. And this is hard work. It is bespoke, it is unique, and it has to be very grounded in the reality of the business and the governments in which you're working. 1.8 is a number I want to leave today with the case for change. In the danger of predicting anything in this world right now, these are the kind of conversations that I'm having around this virtual customer group in front of us. It's a big year for disclosures, we know that. The level of nervousness, anxiety for those who have taken that commitment to disclose is quite high. The level of scrutiny and analysis that's going to be on those reports is out of this world. The level of AI that's been deployed right now to go through CSRD reports and sustainability reports, to pull that together, to draw themes, to draw conclusions, and to draw impactful actions is underway. I'll give it 1 more month, and they're starting to come out. The anxiety and the nervousness about communicating anything about what we're doing is really, really high. But there's value, because when I speak to our clients about reporting, there is this issue about transparency and trust, which we talked about. But within a nanosecond, it becomes a discussion about waste. It becomes a discussion about benchmarking with peers. It becomes a discussion of what can we do better. So I compel you to not think about your transparency and reporting, your regulation in that way, but think about it in a way that you can create action in the action zone on the left-hand side of that diagram. The data here is really, really positive. More to come on that. The second thing is growth and incentives. I won't do the survey in the room, but our research has shown that 40% of CFOs and tax advisors feel that they have a handle on tax and incentives. Let me give you some numbers. 3,000 grants and incentives are available to organizations right now. 50% of that is around reducing carbon, 30% of that around is switching, and the remainder is around innovation. 3,000 grants. If you're a tax colleague, there is 2,500 tax incentives and tax exemptions. When you add that together, the level of capital that you can either access or save is huge. How many of us sustainability professionals know how to access that, how to bring it together, and how to create a capital program for an organization? Tax and incentives is your best friend. It is complicated, though. It is complicated. And for anyone who is working within governments and regulatory policies, I really encourage you to find ways of making this easier. We really need this to create the case for change. Climate risk assessments. Many of you have done them. The numbers that I shared with you on GDP being lost tells me there's not many people doing anything with them. I recently spoke to a hotel organization who's got 200 hotels around the world. On average, they've got 10 to 15% of their hotels unutilized because of climate events. And I say to them, have you done the climate risk assessment? Yes, we did. But so what are you doing with that? Well, we thought it was a one-off. It was a really warm year, excessive water. And the story continues, is that we have a proverbial head in the sand when it comes to climate risk and taking that into action. 10% GDP. Everyone in this room will be touched by climate risk. If you're not in the game of adaptation, if you're not using that as a lever for action, up your game. That is a really, really, really important thing to do to keep your business resilient and keep performance moving forward. The final thing, scope 3. Scope 1 and 2 is within our gift. In general, we can incite action. When it comes to scope 3, you're in a different ballgame. I've met so many customers and clients 2 years ago who said, we'll identify their top 10 suppliers, supply chain. We have our corporate strategy to net zero. We're going to take that and we're going to transfer it straight into the supply chain, job done. That's not the job done. The level of challenge that supply chains have to be able to meet the corporate commitment is huge, and they do not have the money for it. Even more so, the organizations who were expecting them to say, you're a supplier to me, I am big, you're small, you must do what I say, don't have a contractual framework to put that into commitment. There is no legal break in the procurement activity or the contract they've committed to that says anything about them spending money to commit to the carbon commitment of the organization. Zero. Zero. Scope 3 becomes a game of collaboration. It becomes a game of innovation, and it becomes a game very quickly of investing in your supply chain in a collaborative way. And I reduce my voice to just be a little bit more gentle, and for those of you who are involved in that, to be way more proactive and engaging with your key suppliers. They need help. Who is going to fund it is the biggest question we get asked. Be innovative and be creative. Scope 3, moving to action. Biggest challenge we have for those who are in the supply chain world. So I'm going to finish off my next 10 minutes talking about the language of business. Sustainability, action zone, language of business. If you typed into Google Translate from sustainability to business, the next slide is going to be the way to do that. In general, your sustainability pathway begins in very different parts, depending on your organization, depending on the speed, depending on your resources, depending on what you have. But there's 3 main areas. First is setting the strategy. Second is about how can you accelerate action. And finally, enabling transition. Let me unpick this a little bit for you. This diagram has taken the concept of sustainability language and it's turning into your to-do list in the language of business. For example, defining strategy. If I am speaking to the CFO and we're talking about we want to implement sustainability action, he wants to see some valuation and risk modeling. He wants to understand the cost of capital. He wants to understand the ROICE. He wants to understand the capacity and ability for the organization to deliver. Valuation and risk modeling. He really wants to see that. If I go to the board, they want to understand the business case and the compelling reason for change on the top line. We have been awesome at the first part of that. The assessing the business and the operating model, those areas of highlighting the risk, highlighting the need for change, we've been really good at that. We've also been really good at the bottom right-hand side. Was it left-hand side for you? Yeah, right-hand side. Bottom right-hand side, risk reporting and regulation. That's back to that really comfort crutch we've had for the last 2 years to talk about the need for change is based on regulation. We've been awesome at that. The rest of it, we've got a lot of work to do. So let me pick a couple of examples for you. When you're looking to accelerate action, scope 3, your supply chain, procurement, legal team are your new best friends. When you're taking your corporate strategy into the action zone, developing a roadmap with your operations and business units is a must. If they don't know how to go about doing this in operations, then we have not succeeded. And I'll tell you what, they're not standing around with spare capacity ready to deploy our sustainability transformation roadmap. So we also need to create the case for change in the operations. The final part I would call out is we have a lot to do around upskilling our organizations to make them aware about what tangible actions that they can take to support. So if I put all of this together, sustainability, meet your friend capitalism. Sustainability needs to learn and speak the business of language if we are going to access new value pools to create action and provide business the opportunity to thrive while staying within our planetary boundaries. We need to really move to the half-moon diagram to start talking about the opportunities that we have and start changing our dialogue into the words that are on this and use the mechanisms of business that are established, well-trodden, and are there to be utilized. The final thing I want to leave with you is the complexity of the world in which we work. My final survey mention I want today is, we did a survey a few years ago about long-term value. We interviewed CSOs of the major organizations around the world. Many of you may be CSOs or work in CSOs functions, so I'll share this with you. The CSO is a relatively new role in the boardroom, maybe 6 to 8 years old. We asked the CSOs, how are you feeling about your job? 60% of them told us that they were deeply unhappy. They were deeply frustrated about action, and they were deeply feeling isolated and lonely. This is amazing. In 6 years, we've created a role and demotivated it so fast. That is exceptional. This diagram is the reason why. In the action zone, CSO functions, what I'm seeing trending is you're either likely to get slimmed down or a lot of the action is moving into the operations of the business. You need some friends. So when you're building the business case and the transition plan to fund it, I think this is my CFO. It's your new best buddy. He or she needs to be side by side building that pathway for you. And guess what? They're really good at getting capital. Work with them. When you're looking at the data and technology, your CIO should be developing the mechanisms for you to capture data, report data, automate data, and keep accountability. Your board, in general, are not educated enough around your issues and the complexity of this situation. You need to upskill your board so they can ask the right questions. They'll be awash with Trump 2.0. They'll be awash with Omnibus. They'll be awash with, is this really important? Let's take the agenda to them and educate and support them. They need to be on side. They need to understand the action zone. They need to understand the new language. They need to understand the opportunity to improve. So it is a game of hyper-collaboration. The good news is you'll get to meet new friends. And I always found it is very nice to hang out with people who don't have the same view as you. You mostly learn something. It changes the game. And if there's now a time to hang out and make some new friends and learn something new and use a mechanism of support, it's now. We really need this group to be on side, but it is the sustainability community that needs to move this forward. They need our leadership, they need our help, they need our guidance, but we need to upskill ourselves in the language of business to get to action. So, the final thing I want to leave you with some thoughts as you go through the next 2 days. There is turbulence ahead. But do not be confused by turbulence and action. Turbulence is not something that's going to stop us moving. It's just going to make it bumpy. Buckle up, be clear what you're trying to do, and really understand what you can do to support your business through this. In the action zone, we need to get into the detail. We need to be short-term. We need to be pragmatic. We need to think about what we're going to do, and also what we're not going to do, where, who's going to fund it, and when. I would really encourage you to think a little bit more short-term in your thinking to get through this turbulence. Sustainability and growth needs to coexist. I feel it's better to recognize the risks that are facing us, but it's much more powerful to get to action, to access new value pools if I start talking about the opportunities. And finally, we need some friends. You're all in this area because you care passionately about it. That passion is infectious. The organization needs you to learn about what they do, and we need to learn how to use them and support them in getting action. I always like to leave a conference with a free gift. I like to leave a gift for everyone. The QR code is a whole new conversation which we just released about geopolitics. It's a survey we undertook about the geopolitical landscape right now. It is quite interesting reading. It is the most talked about thing that we're going through with clients at the moment. And my encouragement is we need to recognize how geopolitics, not just regulation, but geopolitics impacts our opportunity to move to action. So if you scan the QR code, we'll make it available afterwards. It's a full report that's just summarized that. So colleagues, we're in the action zone. We've got a lot of work to do. Now is not the time to give up. We can't rely on regulation, so let's use the mechanisms of business to get to action. Thank you very much.
I scanned your QR code. We don't really have enough time for questions, but I'm going to certainly take 2 online because we've had a whole load come in. So is that okay? The first one is from Sarah, or possibly Sarah, forgive me. If being a pace setter is 1.8 times more valuable than being an observer, what are the main headline measures in there that we can use to sell this concept?
Well, the first thing is start to look at the value across those 5 characteristics. So when you're talking about value, the survey showed the 5 areas from society, planetary, customer, and financial. So first of all, start using that as a dialogue for your discussions about your action zone. And secondly, is really pragmatic stuff. And most of the folks who were pace setters were doing the transition pathway. So those 2 slides are connected. So the transition pathway, the language of business, the action strategy, the transition planning, all of that is what we're seeing pace setters do.
And this is a great question which moves us on to the next session, so I particularly want to take it. You're talking that it's business and growth that is the driver. That's where we've got to make some new friends. But those exact principles are being used by politicians and governments all over the world to avoid net zero. So what do businesses do? Do they vote with head or heart? Do they try and keep in line with the latest government whim? Or do they look out the business case? In 30 seconds, please.
I don't really know the answer. No. It's quite a big question, but
yeah.
I think what I've seen businesses do is that businesses in general recognize the cycle of politics. Mm-hmm. This time will also pass. Most of them are on capital investment cycles, which are 2x times the level of a normal parliamentary situation. So I'm not seeing governments actually influencing hugely the medium to long-term investment plans for major businesses. But they're aware of it, particularly in the short term. Hence my encouragement is we need to be aware of the short-term needs and be pragmatic and not allow perfection to get in the way of progress. For the next 2 years, I believe that will be really important.
Gerard, it's been brilliant. Thank you very, very much indeed. Gerard Gallagher from EY.